rights and dignity of all the people, Jewish and Palestinian, on the land. And so you find, for instance, if you look just a few weeks ago on the website of the National Council of Young Israel, a large American Orthodox Jewish organization, the story of the executive vice president of that organization traveling to the settlement of Yitzhar, where he writes in glowing terms about the yeshiva there, the Od Yosef Chai yeshiva, and the Rosh Yeshiva, who he calls a man of great loving kindness towards the Jewish people who was being unfairly persecuted by the Israeli government for some picayune offenses that he doesn't mention. Well, in fact, the Od Yosef Chai yeshiva is quite well known if you read the Israeli press, and that Rosh Yeshiva in particular, because he recently was found that he wrote something in which he had suggested that it was acceptable to kill Palestinian children on the argument that they might grow up to be terrorists. In 2006, General F.A. Tom said that he believed that Palestinians should be forcibly removed out of the country from their homes. In 2007, and then again in 2008, he was the keynote speaker at the Israel Day concert in Central Park, which is co-sponsored by the National Council of Young Israel. It's an entirely Orthodox affair in New York City every year. In 2009 and 2010, the Israel Day concert. You know, the Israel Day concert, they put out a big poster, and it's a very Jewish kind of thing. Everyone who sponsors the Israel Day concert gets their name on the poster, and they get to dedicate it to someone. Well, in 2009 and again in 2010, one of the families that is on the poster that partially sponsored the Israel Day concert in New York City dedicated their sponsorship to Meir Kahane. So this is some of the troubling character that you see in the emerging Zionism of young Orthodox American Jews. Not that all Orthodox American Jews believe that by any means. We ourselves go to an Orthodox synagogue. There are many, many, many very tolerant people, but there is an indulgent attitude towards that perspective. And so you see the kind of Disneyfied Zionism of the American Jewish establishment being, I think, in the younger Orthodox generation, instead being replaced by a Zionism of the land that is often unconcerned with the liberal democratic character of Israel. Then you have the last corner, which is the large, relatively secular majority of younger American Jews. And for these people, Zionism is in utter collapse. And I said that according to this American Jewish Committee 2006 survey, 79% of Orthodox Jews, 18 to 30, said they felt very close to the state of Israel. Amongst non-Orthodox Jews, it was 16%. So you see amongst non-Orthodox Jews a dramatic decline in Zionism. The challenge in the Orthodox Jewish community is to take this very, very vibrant Zionism that exists and infuse it with a liberal character, to recreate figures like Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who in 1948, when he was teaching at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and he heard of the massacre at Deir Yassin, he said to his students, "We're not having class today. I want you to go to your room and ask for forgiveness and grieve for what's happened in the state of Israel." That's the kind of Orthodox Jewish leadership that used to exist in the United States and that must exist again. If that very vibrant Zionism, we should celebrate its vibrancy, but if it's going to have a liberal character again. The challenge in this other corner, amongst younger secular American Jews, is radically different. These young people are liberals. They are the product of the liberalism of American Jewish political culture. They believe deeply in free expression and human rights for everybody. Many of them have Arab and Muslim friends. They voted for Barack Obama at virtually 90%, despite the whispering campaign that he was a Muslim. I think that American Jewry can take great pride in their liberal democratic principles. And yet, the leadership of the American Jewish community has created no space in which they can integrate those liberal democratic principles into a Zionist identity. They've never been told that they can hate some of the Israeli government's policies and still love the state of Israel. And instead, they've been given this Disneyfied picture of Israel and told to love that And yet this is a generation, particularly I tend to find, with a very, very keen sense for authenticity, the most marketed to generation of all time. And there is this ability to smell that this is not an authentic vision of what's actually happening in Israel. And so instead of this producing a vibrant, robust Zionism, in fact, what it's producing is no Zionism at all. It's producing a kind of an existential shrug in which young American Jews look at some of the things they see coming out of Israel, and they say, well, that's bothersome to me, it's disturbing to me, but you know what? It's not really my problem. It's their country. Let them figure it out. I think the way to revive Zionism amongst this large group of younger, non-Orthodox American Jews is, in fact, to stop using Israeli democracy as an alibi and start using it as a rallying cry. To invite them to be part of the struggle in Israel, not only the struggle against Israel's external threats, but the struggle within Israel against the domestic threats to Israeli democracy. To say, this is your country in a meaningful sense. This is your patrimony. This is your birthright. There is a struggle going on. We're not going to pretend that there is no struggle. We're not going to pretend that there are no dark currents in Israeli politics and Israeli society. We're going to face them head on, and we're going to ask you to struggle in solidarity with your Israeli cousins so that you are not the generation in which Jewish democracy dies, in which democracy dies in the only Jewish state on earth. We're going to invite you to see Zionism, and particularly liberal democratic Zionism, as a struggle. Heschel wrote once, he wrote, "Dark and dreadful would be our life today without the comfort and joy that radiate from the land of Israel." But then he went on to say, Israel's existence alone is not enough. The question, he wrote, is how to make this a state worth waiting 2,000 years for. And I think that's the question we need to pose to younger American Jews. How to make this a state worth waiting 2,000 years for. I think if we ask them that question, that Zionism, liberal democratic Zionism, Heschel Zionism in the United States can be reborn. Thanks very much.
Peter, you've said in your essay, every country manifests some kind of ideological divide, but in contemporary Israel, the gulf is among the widest on earth. Now, how has it got to that? Because that goes in some way towards what's happened in the States, I would think, because you're talking about a widening gulf there as well, aren't you, within the Jewish community?
There is a widening gulf, and yet there's also a widening gulf within the American Jewish community, but also between American Jewry and Israel, I fear. There are a number of factors. First of all, the massive growth of the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox population in Israel. You know, people like David Ben-Gurion believed essentially that this was a phase that was dying out in Jewish history, that there would be a marginal force. In fact, because of birth rate, there are now a majority of the Jewish first graders in Jerusalem are Haredi or ultra-Orthodox. You have amongst in the Haredi population, and polling will bear this out, essentially a preference for theocracy over democracy and a willingness to use violence again and again and again when it comes to policies of the state that they disagree with. So that's one troubling factor. You also have the rise of and just to give you one example of the kind of the perspective, I mentioned Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who's the most important Sephardi rabbi in Israel, the spiritual leader of the party Shas. He said about the women who were arrested for carrying a Sefer Torah at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, he said they should be slapped. Then, in addition to that, you have what has happened to the national religious population. The national religious, the Dati Israelis, were part of every Israeli government before '67. They were essentially basically people who were part of the Zionist consensus, but worked on issues having to do with, Shabbos observance and making sure that there was kashrut. But after 67, particularly with Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, Rabbi Kook the Younger, there became this messianic idea about the West Bank. The idea that essentially occupation and settlement of the West Bank would be the handmaiden of the Messiah. And so this has produced the movement Gush Emunim, and now its kind of second and third generations, has produced a deeply, deeply illiberal character to not all of the settlers, but to a significant chunk of the settlers in the West Bank, and to a significant chunk of those national religious Dati Israelis inside. Then you add to that the Russian immigration of the 1990s, and a whole series of studies have shown that immigrants from the recent immigrants from the former Soviet Union are strikingly more hostile in their views towards Arabs than are other secular Israelis, and strikingly less invested in democratic norms in general. That part of this comes from the political culture that they brought with them from the Soviet Union. So, for instance, Avigdor Lieberman, who was the fruit of that immigration, said recently that he thought the Israelis should do in Gaza what Putin had done in Chechnya. And so you have, it seems to me, these array of different forces, none of which are particularly rooted in the ideals of Israel's Declaration of Independence, which promised complete equality to all people, none of whom are particularly rooted in Herzl's vision. You know, if you read Herzl's novel Antnerland, which is his vision of a future Jewish country, he envisions this election between one candidate whose party is open to all people, that has Arabs in his party, and another candidate who wants to strip Jews and non-Jews, who wants to only have Jews be allowed to vote in this Jewish state. He imagines this struggle for the soul of the state. And I think, indeed, that struggle is going on, but there are more forces today than there were that essentially take the latter view of what a Jewish state should be.
But is that automatically now increasingly reflected in the Knesset? I mean,
yes.
And where Labor as a party has declined,
Yes.
Is that also explained by this?
Yes, I think that there are a number of, it is reflected in the Knesset. In fact, Haaretz recently wrote an editorial early in the spring that this was the most racist Knesset in Israel's history. That it had introduced more anti-Arab legislation than any Knesset in Israeli history. Now, the reasons for this, there are several reasons for this. Part of it is these demographic shifts that I'm talking about. Part of it is the collapse of the Israeli left in the wake of the Second Intifada and then the withdrawal from Gaza. So one of the reasons that the Israeli Labor Party has fallen apart, even though Kadima has kind of replaced it, and at least Tzipi Livni, the head of Kadima, is in her views not very different from where Labor is, even though others in Kadima are further to the right, is the view that Israel offered everything to the Palestinians at Camp David and then at Taba, and in response the Palestinians created a second intifada, and that Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, and in response Hamas launched all this rocket fire. I think in that story is far too simple. There are true elements to that story. Yasser Arafat, I think, deserves to be cursed by history for his refusal to make a counteroffer at Camp David. But the offer at Camp David, Shlomo Ben Ami, the Israeli negotiator himself, has said that if he were a Palestinian, he would not have accepted that offer. The really important Israeli move was in January 2001, when the Israelis basically accepted the Clinton parameters. But it's important to remember that by that point, the Israeli government had essentially already collapsed. So the idea that there was this consensus in Israel to offer the Palestinians a contiguous Palestinian state, there was an Israeli government that basically was willing to sign up to that offer, but it was a minority Israeli government that was already being besieged by the right, and Israel is now being led by the very people who rejected and attacked Barak for in fact being open to signing up to the Clinton parameters. So I think the story that has taken hold in Israel about what happened in 2000 and again with the Gaza withdrawal is overly simplistic and essentially has become an excuse for policies that I think are self-destructive.
Now, we've got microphones strategically placed. I can certainly see two at that middle level. There's one right at the top on the left as well, and on the right. We'll keep talking, but if you do want to ask questions, maybe if you make your way to the microphones, and as I see someone come to the microphone,